You may be seated. One of my pastor friends was telling me the story. They were having this beautiful offertory was being sung as the plate was being passed, and all of a sudden they heard this little voice in the pew cry out, "Daddy, you don't have to pay. I'm free. I'm under 5." So it took a little while to get the congregation back in order after that one. I'm free. You can't have that excuse. I'm free. I'm under 5. The father was having a Father's Day meal with his family, and he was having the meal that he had asked for, and his youngest daughter looked up at him and said, "Daddy, you're the boss of the family, aren't you?" And he smiled and looked down at her and said, "Yes, princess, I guess you can say I'm the boss." And then she continued on. She says, "Because Mommy put you in charge, right?" It's the idea in the family, who is in charge of this family? Who is in charge of the church? We've been doing a series on the book of Acts, which is a theology or a history of the church, a story that's told to communicate our ecclesiology, or how is the church supposed to be organized. Last week we spoke about generosity in the early church, that everyone shared as they had in common, and no one had anything in need. And I just heard story after story after that powerful sermon I preached of all the homes and property that was sold and given to the church. Okay, you don't hear that. Then Ananias and Sapphira, who were a part of that story, they said that they had given their property and such money, but they had lied to the church and to God, and they were found dead and buried. So the story is kind of interesting and unique in the book of Acts. The idea of what is the church about, how is it to be organized, and what was important to the early church. But what's really important, I think, is that was then, and this is now. And as we read these stories, how do we interpret them for the modern church? What do these early stories of the start of the church, what do they have to do with us 2,000 years later? Today we're going to look at a leader in the church, a man named Saul, that would later be called Paul, from the book of Acts, chapter 19, verses 1 through 9, reading along with me in your pew Bible. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now he was going along and approaching Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He asked, "Who are you, Lord?" And the reply came, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." The men who were traveling with him stood speechless because they heard the voice, but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. What is this story? What does this have to do with the modern church? It's a story about a leader in the church. But first, let's go back to the very first chapter of the book of Acts. Acts chapter 1, verse 8. Jesus is speaking with the disciples before his ascension. He's around. He's been resurrected from the grave. He's meeting with his disciples. He's been meeting with them. And before he goes into heaven, he says to them, "I want you to begin the church in Jerusalem, then to Judea, then to Samaria, and then to all parts of the world." beginning. This little church, this little really Jewish sect at the time, would begin right in Jerusalem. Then it would spread out to Judea. Then it would go to the Gentiles in Samaria. And then it would reach every single place on the planet. And it's done that. The church is now everywhere. There's not a language, there's not a translation that hasn't been translated in the 21st century. The church has spread from a little place in Jerusalem to the entire globe. And the book of Acts is explaining how will it do that. And so you have this man named Saul walking down the road to Damascus. Now, in the book of Acts, there are 28 chapters. And out of those 28 chapters, 3 of those chapters tell this exact same story. Now, if you were an author and you're telling the story, you would seem it like if 28 chapters of your book, small chapters, by the way, 1 would do it. Maybe 2 if you told the story of Saul. But 3 times? That means, to us, it should be highlighted. We as the modern church should understand what is happening in chapter 9, chapter 22, and chapter 26 of 28 chapters, where this man named Saul is confronted on the way to Damascus. Now, he's on the way to Damascus to persecute what it calls the way. What is the way? It's the journey. It's the Christian church. They began calling themselves the Way. I like that. The Church of the Way. We're all on a journey. And so Saul at this time, was out to persecute. He'd even been present in earlier chapters at the stoning of Christians, killing them. So here is a man who is going to become the leader of the Christian church, and he's running around, according to the book of Acts, capturing people, throwing them in jail, and having them killed. Sounds like a great elder of the Presbyterian Church to me. So he's walking, and a light comes down from heaven. There are individuals with him, and he is blinded. Now his eyes are open, and he's thrown to the ground, and he hears a voice. Now, as your pastor, I've said this before, if I stand up here and said the other day I was walking down the road, I saw this light from heaven, and voices started talking to me, you would give me the name of your psychiatrist, correct? But in the 21st century, as we look back, we're reading this story about a man who's walking down the road who is going to have a conversion experience. And we'll get to that in a moment. George W. Bush, when he was running for president, he had something that was crucial to his platform. He called it compassionate conservatism. The idea that he wanted to be a part of a country and to lead a country, as he said it, that would take care of fellow citizens. I was very interested in that platform, and I remember reading a lot about it. The idea that we would be a part of America, the idea that would be proposed and put out there, that we would be a group of people that would take care of one another. That sounds great. As a pastor, I like that idea. The idea that we would live in a country that would take care of one another. It was his platform. And when he came into the office, that's what he was going to do for 4 years. That's what he wanted to do, I'm sure, for 8 years, was to put forth that primary piece of legislation that would help him do that. Well, remember, something happened, right? A date in history. September 11th, remember George Bush, September 11th, 2001, sitting there with those school children, reading a book, part of his compassionate conservatism, the idea that we will leave no child left behind, we're going to take care of all of our kids, that was there. He was doing the agenda in which he wanted to pursue. But then a CIA agent walks up and whispers in his ear something. Our country was under attack, and it would change his entire course. Every decision he made, everybody he surrounded himself with. He had a conversion experience right there. And you have too. Sometime in your life, something has happened to you. You were going along with the status quo. Life was going great. It was a doctor's office. It was a phone call. It was something that happened in your life that changed everything. And from that day forward, everything would be different. And that's what this is about. This is a man that something happens to him on the way to Damascus. I don't understand it. I can't explain it. I'm not going to argue it with anybody, but something happened to a man named Saul on the way to Damascus. In fact, it's immersed in our culture. If you're not even in the Christian church, I was driving down the road this week listening to a National Public Radio communication interviewing somebody. And this person who wasn't in the Christian tradition said, "This is my Damascus Road experience." And I thought to myself, when she just said that, what does that mean to her? In the Christian church, a Damascus Road experience means we were stopped in our tracks and something happened to us spiritually or something happened to us in our lives. But this story is so entrenched in our culture. We understand what it means by Damascus Road experience. You may not be talking about Paul, but you're talking about something that stopped you in your tracks and changed the way you think, the way your heart beats, the way you view your world. And that's what happened. So he stops, he's hit by light, and he wants to know who the me is. Paul, you're persecuting me. And Paul goes, I'm a religious guy. I'm doing what's right here. These people in the way are a bunch of kooks. I'm trying to stop them from what they're doing. Correct? And then he says, and this is the good theology. You can walk away with this. If you persecute those people, you're persecuting me. So here's the theology of the text that we're reading this morning. If you persecute someone sitting next to you, you're persecuting the Jesus. It's the idea of if you do it unto them, you do it to me. And treat other people the way you'd like to be treated. And that's what Paul gets confronted with. Why are you hurting other people? And when you hurt them, don't you know you're hurting God? And you presumably love God, correct? So he stopped in his tracks, the light hits him, his eyes are wide open, but he can't see, and you've been the same. Sometimes our eyes are wide open to our families, to our community, and to our world, but we're missing something. We're still blind. And you need to peel back those scales. So then, a man named Ananias, not the guy in chapter 4 that was cheating the church and was found dead and buried. This is another Ananias. And God comes to this Ananias in his room alone. And God says, I want you to go meet this guy named Saul. And I want you to set him straight and get him on his way. And Ananias thought to himself, this is the guy that I just watched stone Stephen. This is the guy that's persecuting Christians. You can give that job to somebody else, okay? I am not the one who is going to speak with this man. But what happens in the text, this early story, it says that he is told by God, Ananias has said, this one is going to lead the Gentiles and kings and people of Israel. This one person that you will see, that you will touch, that you will heal, will change the world. Now everybody is here this morning. Something happened here. Something happened in the early church, or we would not be here. I don't know what you think about this story. I don't know what you think about the book of Acts, but I'm telling you, as I stand here, something unique and special happened to this man named Saul. And it was another individual that touched him and moved into his life that made a difference. And you've also done the same. There's someone in your family. There's someone in your neighborhood. There's someone in your community, especially if you're a teacher. You said a word to them and it changed their life. It put them on a new course. And that is the power of faith. That is the power of Ananias going to Saul and making a difference. And then we read that Paul is not going to have an easy job of it. He is going to suffer for the church. He is going to plant churches all around the globe, but it is not going to be easy for this man. So the moral of the story, if a light hits you and it starts speaking to you, run the other way fast. If God comes down in your room and says, I want you to do something, pretend like you don't hear it. Because it may not be an easy task. Sometimes what the church asks us to do is not easy. It takes our time. It takes our talent. It takes our treasure. That's the story of the early church. That's the story of the modern church. The other story is say yes. Do you say yes or no more? I have something over here that's going to make a difference in this person's life. No. You can help this organization over here. No. This can make a huge difference in this family's life. No. The idea was Saul said yes and became Paul. He took his Hebrew name and changed it to a Greek Latin name, Paul. I'm going to have a ministry to millions of people. Millions of people that my life will help change. And Ananias, he had one job. This guy had scales on his eyes. He couldn't see right. He didn't have the right philosophy, the right theology, the right understanding. And so what your job is to do is to remove those scales from his eyes. That's a hard job that a pastor has, isn't it? Because you're talking to a lot of people sometimes, and there's a dark area. There's an area where they just don't want to see, and it's your job to stand in front of them with ulcers, sweating, and saying, oh man, I think we're supposed to do this. What do you think? Do you think we can accomplish that? Do you think we can do that? The idea of a person or people or being someone who is taking the scales off of other people's eyes so they can see a new way. A conversion. Presbyterians necessarily don't like to think in conversion. That I went to church today and that preacher was so good and he was fired up about Jesus and that rock and roll band and I raised my hand and I met Jesus again. We see it a little differently in the Presbyterian church. Not that that way is right or wrong, but we like to think of the baptismal thought. That I grew up in the church. That I'm a covenant kid. And I had Sunday school teachers, and I had elders that prayed for me and loved me as a kid. Someone who tapped me on the shoulder as a youth pastor and said, hey, I think you can be a pastor. So I see it not as a conversion overnight experience, but as a process in life. But there is no doubt in the book of Acts, Paul is having a conversion experience. He is headed in one direction, and then he stops in his tracks and goes in a different direction. That's not foreign to us, though, is it? You've been stopped in your tracks at some point in your life. I said it earlier. There is something that's happened in your life, some of them, that stopped you. You had to do critical reflection on who you are and where you're headed. Was it in high school? Was it in college? Was it as a grown person? Was it the challenges you had with raising your children? What was it? Was it a death in the family? Something that stopped you in your tracks and made you reevaluate who you were and where you're headed. There's a man named Richard Evans. He's written many New York best time seller books. And he shares a story on his website. A very personal story. Not about his writing of books, not about his growing up, but about his marriage. And he says in this story on his website that my life was going great. I was successful. I had made it. I sold all these #1 best-selling books, but my marriage was in the tubes. It was a disaster. And he says he can remember the lowest point in his marriage. He was in the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead, Atlanta, and he was on a book tour, and he was talking to his wife on the telephone, and the phone conversation was a disaster. It was yelling and screaming and blaming, and he hung up that phone so mad, thinking, I cannot change that woman. She is not going to make it. This marriage is not going to make it. And he was mad at himself. He was mad at her. He was mad at God. He saw his marriage as a failure. He got on the plane and went home. He was greeted at home the next day with no one there. She was off doing something else. She came home, would not even speak to him. They're laying in bed that night, and he gets up in the morning, and he reflects to himself, and he thinks, I wanted to change me. Voila, light bulb, right? What if I changed me? What if I'm the only person I can change? And it came down to one question. He rolled over to her and says, how can I make your day better? And she rolled over, looking at him funny, and she goes, go clean the kitchen. And he got up and went and cleaned the kitchen, and she laid there thinking, I thought he was going to say something smart like to me. So the next day, in bed, rolls over, how can I make your day better today? And she looked at him and she said, go clean the garage. So he got up and he cleaned the garage. The next day he says, how can I make it? She stopped him. Why are you saying this? He goes, I mean it. I want to make your day better. Making your day better will make both of our days better. It'll make our marriage better. So she gave him a list to do. And then the next week, he rolled over, the same question. He says, sit down with me for breakfast and let's talk. And they talked about their marriage, their relationship, their children. And it went on and on. He had a conversion experience. He was stopped in his tracks, and it came down to one simple concept. Change me. And ask a simple question. How can I help you? And that changed everything. That's the Christian journey. It's self-reflection. It's pondering, how can I change me for the better? And when I change me for the better, I'm going to look at you differently. My children differently. My spouse differently. My neighbor. Oh, those neighbors can drive us crazy, right? The understanding of conversion, of change, of changing our hearts, our minds, our worldview, does make a difference. For yourself, for your family, for our church, and for our world. We can make a difference. Pray with me.